This is Steve Ridgel and Remy, and today I thought we'd talk a little bit about death. You know, nobody wants to talk about death. People don't like to mention it. The only time they talk about death is when somebody is, dying or has died. Now, Christians ought to do better. I've been thinking about how much Paul, the apostle, when he wrote to churches, how much he talked about death. And I think there's four things we can think about a little bit to help us frame death discussions, because we Christians above all ought to be able to talk about death and dying. When Paul wrote the letter to the church in Corinth, chapter 15 of 1 Corinthians is the famous resurrection chapter. One reason we need to talk about death as Christians, because resurrection has no meaning if there is no death. They crucified Jesus on the cross. He was resurrected. That's the two big foundational pillars for the good news of Jesus. And so for us, when we die, one of the great promises, for instance, of baptism in Romans 6, is that because we shared in his death when we were baptized, we shall also share in his resurrection. So Christians, when we die, that's not the end for us. We are going to be raised from the dead. And so I think that's one reason you talk about death more than we sometimes do. Now, there are other reasons too. Paul has that famous chapter when he wrote to the church in Thessalonica, and he talks about that we do not grieve like those with no hope because we believe in the resurrection. We don't grieve like people that have no hope. People that are not Christians, when your loved one dies, if you don't believe, you think that's just it. They lived, they died, and it's all over. So what's the point? But we Christians don't grieve like that. We grieve with hope because we believe we're going to see each other again when we are resurrected. So for us, death is not something, when a loved one dies in Jesus, we don't grieve like other people. Of course we grieve because we miss them, but we have hope, and that changes how we grieve. So it changes how we look at death. And of course, Paul had that famous thing when he wrote to the church in Philippi, where he talks about, I don't know if it's better to die and go be with Jesus. That would be better, but I know it's good for me if I stay here. Christians very much view death as the gateway to a better life with Jesus. For us, death is not the end. Death is not even a tragedy. For Christians, death is the way we enter into life with Jesus forever. And so he kind of frames that in, when you're here, work for Jesus. But when you die, it's better because you get to go be with Jesus. And we Christians ought to frame the discussions about death that way. And then, of course, you've also got Paul's, when he talks about the time for my departure is at hand, writing to Timothy, when he says the time for my departure is at hand. And he talks about he's going to get the crown of life. He talks about how he's fought the good fight, how he's kept the faith, how he's finished the race. That's how we Christians view death. We're going to get the crown of life. And when we see the time for our departure, we look at our lives and we want to fight to the end. We want to combat evil. We want to bring people to Jesus. We want to stay faithful. We want to finish strong. That's what Christians want to do. And sometimes as Christians, we know our greatest witness is when we die, not always necessarily when we live. So I think it's important for us to freely talk about death. Don't have to be morbid, don't have to be obsessed, but let's don't wait till people are dying to talk about death. Let's help each other form a healthy view of Christian belief that death ushers us in to a better life.